Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Sermon Podcast for the Church Community for GOD. My name is Mitchell Buchanan. Hopefully you've listened to us before. This is the Sermon Podcast. We're pumped that you're listening with us. Today we have a couple of our preachers from our series on grit, which I think has been a fun little adventure. We're with Jason Carpenter over here and Deb Nava.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Great.
But again, this is the time that we have to come together, and we're going to really chat through Deb's sermon on 1 Peter. I think grit, if you want to chat about it for a second, you don't have to. It feels like you both reference in your sermons, like, this isn't in the Bible anywhere, so nobody test me on this. Nobody look anything up. But it's definitely a concept that, we see throughout the Bible, and something that we should carry as believers of hey, we aren't the type of people that are easily pushed off of our course, or I think this walk that we live and participate with the Lord can be hard. It can be arduous. It can take effort and work. And it's we need to be those people that endure, that hold on and sustain. I don't know. That was my little
That's
That's nice. Absolutely.
Got a couple of a yes man and a yes woman. I'm steering this train wherever I want today. We're going to get wild. But this is kind of how we always start. Deb, if you want to just walk through, hey, this is the text I started from, and then here's a couple of my main points. If you want to dive into this is where it came from in my life of what I was thinking through when I was coming up with a sermon, then we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah. Sounds great. All right. So 1 Peter 4:12, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that is taking place among you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you are sharing Christ's sufferings, so that you may also be glad and shout for joy when his glory is revealed. So a few of these,
That's
points,
the Bible.
That's the word. I've actually never done a full study or anything on 1 Peter, so I kind of had to do some homework. On the front end. But there wasn't anything particularly new or different from some of the other sermons I had done, because this was very early church.
Right.
There's lots of crazy persecution going on. I went over who Nero was and how he was kind of a kooky leader. And he just presented a lot of challenging situations for the church at that time. So
I love that you're Nero was kooky and we all giggled, and he was ultra violent, I hate Christians. There were some challenges, and he's just I hate you all.
He literally invented ways of torture specifically for them. So beyond kooky. But so that's the context, and I think it's ultra important, for us to understand how the church at that time was receiving that message, because it was so specific to their historical moment. And even though it's easy to quickly want to apply it to our moment, I feel it's so important to understand the emotional, social, economic, all the challenges that we're facing the believers at this time. It was from all directions. It was just a full blown just persecution and challenge, and that requires. And it's so early in their faith, and I think I talked about this too. They're so young in their faith, but yet they're still required to show this endurance and this grit and this this kind of character that usually people get a little bit of run up to, but it's they're thrown into it. And I just think a lot about how challenging that is, even if you are further along in your faith and you come up against some really terrible experiences that test you and make you question everything and call out to God, and they're just kind of thrown into it. There's no run up to it. It's this is their moment, and they have to exhibit this type of character and this grit. That's wow, that's a lot to expect from baby Christians, but I think it's also, even though they're so young in their faith, we still have something to learn from the way that they were being spoken to, and then the way that, they responded to their moment.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about like in your sermon, you referenced the different types of like suffering that people experience. Some is just a product of being a human. And then some of it, like you're referencing now, is a product of your like decision to follow a calling. So like even those people who like you, it's one thing to like experience suffering that you have no power to avoid, but then to like answer a calling to like follow Jesus, knowing that immediately it will have negative impact on your life. That's like a whole nother like thing, you know?
Yeah.
So I know that's interesting how that would impact a person's life, because like when I started following Jesus, I did not have to think about whether I was going to suffer.
Right.
You know, it's just like
the power team didn't lay that one out. They didn't make that clear.
Mitch is referencing for all you listeners out there.
We all know, Jason. We all love it.
Not everybody listens to all of our podcasts.
I'm just kidding, dude. I'm just kidding. You can go share the.
I got saved by the power team. All right.
Which is a group of athletes or former athletes that do Herculean, literal feats of strength, and then give
for
a
the gospel, yeah,
give a gospel presentation
for Jesus, yeah. Anyway,
they did not spell out the.
They
suffering.
didn't say I was gonna,
Right.
to say the least,
right.
So yeah, I think that's really, like you're saying, I think it is important to like note, man, in this context in 1 Timothy, it's like these are the things these believers are having to think about. So what does that mean to us now? You know, like, I don't know. It's interesting because you did bring up like your experiences in China, and like there are Christians there that have to make those considerations immediately upon making a decision. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think overall there's so often like texts like this. I think we get in a, not a habit, but in a position in our day and age where we have to just extrapolate. Hey, this is suffering, endure the suffering, and the fire ordeal for us is when you feel stretched financially, or we have to try to equate it to what we're experiencing, or we're so rarely experiencing suffering or persecution, and then. I think for our church community, knowing what happened with Craig and Tara, it's like that is, and as a result, our entire community, not just, hey, this was them, but that moment, I think, of literal, hey, that imprisonment or wrongful accusations or all the fallout from that persecution.
Right.
I think it gives a lot more tangible ways to feel this, and it's not just has to be written off of like, that was their day and age. For us, it looks differently, which I think should give us a way that we can practically, think through how this is working. So one of the questions I had, like Jason split up, there's different ways that you spelled out, like 3 different ways of suffering, which if I did my homework right, it's just being a person. So, hey, I have eczema. Hey,
me too. Hey,
shout out. Hey, I'm really pressed in my time, whatever's going on, or I had a family member pass away. That time and chance happens to us all. We're going to go through things. We can't control every chaotic element, and it is what it is. You said another way of suffering is consequences of our actions, which we all also suffer to varying degrees. And then the third was suffering, alongside Christ or for Christ's sake. And I think kind of what sparked me in a question was that there's an intentionality in the text, where we have to intentionally engage this. What does it look like to suffer with Christ? So how do we do that? I think overall in our world, where I think in the US, we're just seemingly a post-Christian nation where no one really takes offense at, oh, I'm going to church. It's just so indifferent to, I think, faith or religion, where I would think most people are not prescribing to a lifestyle of faith, right? I think in general, it's just so nominal and has been written off as a cultural expression you might have of how you were raised, but it doesn't have much tangibility to our everyday lives. So it seems for the people of that time that their persecution was so immediate. And then for us, we're trying to think through, and there might be an exceptional case, every few years. How do we really intentionally engage, hey, I want to suffer with Christ, or I'm going to, do that? How do we engage that if it's so if it's so even avoided or subdued in our culture where it's not even an affront to anyone?
Yeah, that's a really great question.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is an intentionality with engaging anytime we say yes to Jesus, I think we're inviting the possibility of some type of persecution, whether it's from like our families who are like, you're wasting your time, or what are you doing with your life, and what are you going to do with a Bible degree? And in some cases, that can be people like being disowned by their families or no longer receiving the kind of like support or moral support, any of that kind of stuff. And so in a way you kind of get disconnected from the one like source of connection in your life, and you're having to, as a young person or even older, decide to like follow Jesus in this way where we're saying, yes, we want to serve the poor. We want to engage with like refugees and immigrants and do this kind of work where there's no like immediate payoff. I think from the outside, for like family members or whoever, they're going to look at that as like kind of just a waste of time. And I think and it might not be like this a neuro type of suffering, obviously, but I think in some way or another, all of us have had like slander from people from our churches back home, or rumors told about us, told about Greg and Tara, and having to, with a lot of faith, be able to say like, I know, I know that what I'm doing is we are following Jesus, and this is the way, and to not be afraid of having those conversations, because I know specifically there was a time where there was a lot of that happening, because even though, I'm from Farmington, New Mexico, which is like other side of the country, I was getting emails and texts from people who were like, what's happening over there? And it's like, how did you find out? But it was like people, were intentionally making sure that like my church back home knew that we were a part of some cult or whatever. And that was like their way of trying to, and it's like, I'm 18 years removed from living there, but somehow people came out of the woodwork to like, hey, just to be like really angry about it. And I don't know why they were so personally like, felt affronted by it. Yeah. But for some reason it really offended them or bothered them. And it was like they had to come out and make sure they knew that I knew, how they felt about it, and make sure my parents knew, how, they felt about it. And it was like having to engage with those things with a lot of faith, and not like wavering and being like, actually, I don't know, I'm not sure, but like I was so sure, I never doubted for a moment. And I think a lot of us have had to engage with that kind of persecution, and just engaging it with just a lot of faith and saying like, I'm not afraid of what you have to say, because I'm sure of it, yeah, like you're saying, like we're not, nobody's like throwing us into like a fiery pit or anything like that. But I think because of the way our culture has shifted, social currency is so important. And when that gets damaged, or when it gets, anything happens to it, building up that like, that kind of status again to be like accepted or to be seen as like legitimate is costly, and it takes time to rebuild that or to like gain trust again. And
you can't move to the next town and have a fresh start, or there's an element, I think, in, First Peter where that's an interesting thought you brought up of social currency, because I think once those allegations or those even something that would be taboo, are they a cult? Once that kind of gets attached, it's not as if it shouldn't be unexpected. I think that was a lot of Jason's sermon, was that it should be expected of what we're going to endure. And then, but it's not easy to shirk off or to even correct of like, no, like, come talk to any of us. Here's what we do. You can look up how we file our taxes or how we do whatever. It doesn't matter. And I think it does have a long-standing, and it is marked in some way for our community that, and I think following Jesus' example, being marked as an outsider or someone who's not normative should be something that we expect. It should be something that we can walk in with a confidence that we're following Jesus. It doesn't matter what you talk about. You're going to have to contend with our fruit. You're going to have to contend with how we live, with the word that we live out and try to engage every day. So just relying on that confidence in, I think, who God has made us should make it to where, regardless of that fiery ordeal that we're going to pass through, or that is even that confronts us, we don't change. That's the hope. That's the, grit part of it, is that we, rather than us trying to maneuver out of the situation, when we're faced with that suffering, our option is to just rejoice, which is super powerful. And it shows that I am so confident in who I am. I'm not just going to endure this. I'm going to endure it where I am, proclaiming, I'm rejoicing. I'm like standing on the fact verbally, or socially, that like I'm following the Lord. So if you want to say something, I'll have a conversation about it, which most people don't even want to do that. It's just, a different tactic. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the text, even, it's a big part of it is don't be surprised, or as if it's something that's strange. It's like, he's like, look, this is gonna happen. So like, I think for us, we should also not be surprised. Like, and like Deb was saying, rejoicing is like this muscle that you develop as like a reaction to suffering. And if we don't practice that or like use that muscle, then when it is time to use it, under pressure, it won't be ready, So I think for us, though, we may not experience like the fires of Nero. We do have to learn to develop that mechanism, that response of rejoicing.
Yeah, for sure. And when I think the example that Jason brought up is rejoicing is like an expression of faith that has muscles and authority. Is that your thought, and you're giving that metaphor for it, of that if we're not working that muscle out, we can't actually rejoice how we need to? Or what was your connection?
Yeah, I was thinking about how powerful it is when you are in a moment with somebody and you see their response of rejoicing in a moment where you're like, you're personally offended by it because you're like, dang, like how does someone respond like that in a moment like that? But it's so powerful. But then, it's like, this isn't new for them, or like they're exercising this on the regs. So like when those moments come, that's the knee-jerk response is rejoicing. And I think when those moments come up in your life and you're not responding in that way, instead you're becoming like despondent or weary or whatever, and that becomes your normal response, the opportunities for rejoicing are still there. But if you're not doing that, that muscle gets weak and it doesn't have the power that it could have if you were responding in the way of like rejoicing and with that faith and with like grit. And those, I think I had mentioned about how like, maybe not, but how the hard stuff is the opportunity, right? So like when it's coming, it's like, and we know we're not supposed to be surprised. Like this is the thing, this is part of it. You're in it. You are serving Jesus, so don't be surprised. But if you are getting caught off guard, that means you're not spending time with the Lord, or you're not engaging prayer, you're not spending time in worship, and so that muscle gets weak. And it's like those are the times where we really get, because it's so easy to say yes to Jesus and be happy when everything is going well, and things are smooth and things are fine. But man, when those moments come and that's our response, it is so powerful, and it speaks to so many people, and it serves as this example of like, this is possible, and there is a way. And I think we've had, like I mentioned, like we've had those experiences in our community on so many different people have responded in those ways. That's just like, it's mind blowing, because you're like, oh, whoa. And it like just sticks with you. Kind of like how I mentioned that experience with that young woman in China, like seeing her rejoice in this way and sing a new song before the Lord, because she was so excited to receive her certificate. But then knowing like as soon as she leaves, it's like she's walking right back into everything that's going to make life hard for her again. But it's like, seeing those moments happen are just so powerful. And it, but it gives you this, it sticks with you because then you're like, I know it's possible.
And what you highlighted at I think the back half of your sermon is unexpected, where it sticks with you because it is so unexpected, where the expected response in the middle of suffering is to be despondent or to retreat or to really just have a breakdown moment where you're kind of just collecting yourself. And I think rejoicing is the opposite of any of those. Even at the last podcast we did on grit with Grant, he just referenced his experience of losing his wife and then going back to teach at the academy shortly thereafter, like the next month or two. And it's the most expected thing would be, hey, I need to have a moment. I need to take a season. And I think, you know, he even admitted maybe this wasn't the best way to process my grief. That could be the case. And there could be mistakes made, but it is unexpected, his response in the midst of suffering. And I think it leads people to stand back and say, like, what's going on? Is there something that's driving Grant, that he has a faith or has something that God is calling him to? Or is this just a mistake that's happening? Either way, it's like that burning bush. It takes people's notice. And like, I need to be examining what's happening here because it's not like everyone else.
Yeah. Right.
Which it's just knowing the power in responding unexpectedly is so fun as a believer because it doesn't require anything else from me but to listen and obey. Hey, I like know God's word. I know how I'm supposed to respond, and I just do that. And that's what provides that spark for the rest of the world.
For sure.
To see that, you know, that city on a hill where it's just, we're living us. We're doing us. And that's great because, you know, if we do that, if we live out God's word, it is going to be this spectacle where people are like, this is not what I'm used to. This is not the world around me. It's super cool. And then a question I had on the rejoicing, and this is just my intuitive take. So correct me if I'm wrong.
We will.
15 minutes later, I'm just tears down my face. Yes, Jason. But I think with this responding and rejoicing, I feel like we're not doing this as much as we should as a church community. So just trying to process, like, what is holding us back? Because I just think back on my experience the last 10, 15 years being here. It felt, you know, again, it felt like we had maybe more times together where obviously I didn't have 4 kids, you know, 15, 20 years ago. So I had more time to be with people.
Yeah.
We probably had more times of worship or informal hangouts, or more people did intramurals where we had lessons that we learned where less people do it now. Just natural things, I think, as we age. And then just trying to process where I think a lot of our rejoicing and suffering is probably just digitally communicated. Like I'll post on Workplace or, hey, I'm Instagramming this, because it is vulnerable to post what you're going through, but it is still like a digital platform where it feels that it might dull or like curb, I think, that emotional connection we should have with one another, where it is, you shared that you were in the midst of just a lot of turmoil as a family, and there was a moment where you worshiped, you came down front, you were like jumping, and that people seeing that and like feeling, I think, your response in the middle of that impacted them. You know, it's like, are we shortchanging ourselves because we're doing that digitally, or is it just a matter of our world is different than it was 20 years ago? We need to recalibrate how we are processing that rejoicing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Gosh, that's...
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. Like, one is, I think that formative time in our history, like even as us here, like we're kind of contemporary at the Institute when we went as undergrads, like those were formative years.
Right.
So like, just because we're not in those years anymore doesn't mean those years still don't matter, you know? Like those opportunities we had to develop that muscle, if we're going to use that analogy, should bear fruit now. So even though we may not have all those times that we used to have, we get to experience the benefit of having those times now, you know? And then I think also, like you said, it's just like our life circumstances are different, you know, like practically speaking. But I do really enjoy when we do get those venues, like like a retreat type event, which I think over the years we've done like more or less in certain years, but I've appreciated our commitment to those times, because it does kind of like create like a venue for those sort of expressions.
We definitely have to be more opportunistic in moments, even just worship on Sundays. Like if we aren't engaging that for what it could be, because just naturally circumstances have changed. We probably, there's literally more people. We have children amongst us. There's less time that we will be able to get together for us, because we're making bake sales happen down the road, or this soccer game or that basketball game. There's stuff that we're facilitating. Yeah. And I don't think, and again, this came as just my intuitive thought. So I don't think we're prioritizing like, hey, Jacoby's basketball is more important than like spiritual enrichment for a family. But I think that schedule can be its own grind. And it's like, hey, I know I have to make this happen. And then maybe spiritual enrichment is something that I in my heart prioritize, but it doesn't come out in my schedule.
I don't think we should underestimate the power of sharing a meal, which I know your family does really great. You're always inviting us over, and I think at least even for our family, like the moments that even getting to invite Institute students over or some of the other singles that we wouldn't normally have a shared venue with, just sharing a meal with them and being able to share those stories or like ask how the Lord is working in their life. And because I think, like you're saying, like our lives are so different than they were. But I love being able to like engage like the current students now and hearing from them, like what's their moment? What is the Lord doing for them? Because it's like we had people doing that for us, like and I'm trying. I try to kind of like emulate, like, oh man, I was poured into so much, and I want to do that for the students here or some of the newer people that are coming around, and giving them that moment of like, let's share a meal, and like I want to hear who are you? What's God doing in your life, and how has He like showed up, and what are you learning, and giving them those times to like kind of exercise talking about like the moments because how they are rejoicing in their moment now. And but I think there is a lot of power to like those moments, even though they're not as like grand or as big or as many people. There's just still a lot of like power, I think, in sitting around a table and just being able to like have those conversations and share stories and bring people into a history that they're part of now and be like, man, did you know this happened like, 10, 15 years ago or whatever? And being able to share in that rich history that we have a faith together. And people who have demonstrated that kind of grit over, the last, 20 plus years, like that we've all been given the gift of witnessing. But I think there's a lot of even in like, I don't know, I think being able to capitalize on like those moments that are, out in between like the soccer and the school and whatever all those things are, like I think being I guess like further along in my faith journey, being able to find somebody who's like who's new to it or who's new to this story, that making moments, intentional times to be like, hey, I want to spend some time and share these things with you.
Yeah. I think digitally the just trying to process, because us connecting with each other digitally and really framing that in like suffering and rejoicing. And I think, Instagram is an instant, gram of what is happening in your day, or TikTok is recording what is happening as the seconds pass by. So it's just kind of a passing moment. And so I think both of them should be utilized, or social media in general, utilize of this is process, or like, hey, this is kind of where I'm going through. So I don't think it's a action of negating that. I don't think it'd be possible in the world we live in to totally not participate. So I think engaging those in those forums where we are maybe processing our day, but I think to expect those platforms to carry the power of a person, which even Paul would write in Romans, like, I'm writing to you because I can't be with you.
Right.
And that there's an acknowledged differentiation in a writing or a medium that's not, an interaction with a person. It's different.
It's different.
And so I think in those moments where we are rejoicing, being opportunistic, where we gather together for church, prioritizing that of saying, hey, I'm going to make efforts to be there, because even if I can't watch online, it is a tool. It is better to have that, or to rewatch it. But I think we're kind of struggling against how do we process our faith, and do we rely too much maybe digitally than we should? And I think utilizing those properly, where we can process our moments and just share quick updates, but having a differentiation where this can never convey the power of my person. And I think if we buy into that false identity where I am fully represented here, or if it's not Instagram, did it really happen? Or if it's not recorded, did it really happen? It's no, our person can't be summed up in that. Just how Paul isn't summed up in his writings, it's the power of his person. He'll say in Corinthians, it's the letters he's writing. It's people that are those letters. It's not the actual documents he's sending to people. So I think there's not a singular this, you should or shouldn't post this. And it's, by all means, I think when people post, it is a vulnerable act in and of itself. It is, writing out how you're thinking or feeling and sharing it with people that you know and love. So I don't want to disregard any of those. I just think we all together have to push past those and really invite and demonstrate those vulnerable moments of rejoicing with one another.
Right.
For sure.
Because if you didn't have that moment worshiping with everyone else in a way that was just totally surrendered to the Lord, we all missed out, or if you are just kind of keeping that to our little rectangles of processing, then, we're shortchanging this life that should not be shortchanged, because it requires us as brothers and sisters to be so engaged with one another that it's like, this is how we image the Spirit of the Lord is this interaction, this relationship, this process together where we are shouldering the burdens, the sufferings that we have, and rejoicing with one another. So
yeah, absolutely.
Did you all want to say anything else to touch on, or anything that sparked? Or
I feel pretty satisfied, gotta say.
But I think your sermon was great. I think for people who don't know your story, because you mentioned just from life circumstances, you all been hit from seemingly wave after wave the last few years, being able to share that with more people, because I think the more that we are able to not just focus on, hey, this is a moment we had in our past where we endured suffering, or wasn't it hard being a school that wasn't accredited, and now we are. And it's like, looking back, it's that even on the life circumstances, which is like, we're human beings, we have to open ourselves up, because I think we all are being hit with things every day that life can just beat us down. And I think we have to be the people that can find the Lord in the midst of all those circumstances.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because I think a text like this, where we really highlight, Christ's sufferings, let me think back to those like seminal moments where I can pinpoint that. It's like, hey, if you're discounting, I think the moment you're in, where it's like, hey, I look around my the last 7 days of my life, and all I can think of is suffering. You need to share that with people. We need to have moments where that can be, exercised, and then find the moments to rejoice in the middle of that. So that was one other thing I didn't want to, I know the sermon kind of led through those different elements of suffering. Don't discount any of them, because suffering is real for all of us. It happens every day. And I think we need to, help each other rejoice in the midst of those.
Yeah, for sure.
But thank you for joining us. I'll clap right in front of my face. On the podcast, we love being able to talk through sermons. I think hear one another's heart and just push for more and more truth in this conversation. In every other conversation we have this week, I pray that we can invite God's word and then really dig into what does grit look like for us. So thanks for watching, listening, and we'll see you next week.